Honorable Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to address this forum, a new but already well-established and noble institution that reflects the sober views of the majority of humanity concerned about the deadly effects of drugs. The forum has helped to move forward drug control, to make drug policy more responsive to the need of those most seriously affected along the whole chain of the drug industry, from the poor farmers that cultivate it, mostly in the third world, to desperate addicts who consume it, mostly in the developed world, as well as to those caught in the crossfires of trafficking. You have championed the cause of shared responsibility between states as much as within communities. Rather than just keeping a narrow focus on law enforcement and prevention, necessary as they may be, let me focus on what we at the United Nations have been promoting in the past few years. We must continue to put a lot of emphasis on health, on development, on security, on justice, because we see drug control and drug policy in general as being at the crossroads of these four crucial themes of the United Nations. The consensus is there. I can firmly state that the United Nations, its member states, its secretariat, and its many agencies share common values regarding this problem. There is unanimity that drug control must be aimed at reducing both supply and demand. This is not new. There is an understanding that in the regions that grow illicit crops, we must eradicate poverty, not only crops. Of course, there is agreement that health must be placed at the core of drug policy. By recognizing that drug addiction is a treatable health condition, there is awareness that we must continue to develop scientific yet compassionate new ways to help those affected. The realization that drug addicts should be sent to treatment, not to jail. It's there, appreciated and supported by most member states of the United Nations, but not yet universal. We need to gain more ground on this. There is, of course, the realization that underdevelopment makes countries vulnerable to drug trafficking. Therefore, development is part of drug control at the source of the problem, and vice versa. There is conviction that drug trafficking, with its enormous economic and firepower, has become a threat to security, and vice versa. Insecurity breeds illicit activity. Hence, measures to strengthen government administration, to promote good governance, and enforce the rule of law are inescapable ways of keeping drugs away from our society. Now, where do we stand today, early 2010, in our effort to limit drug production, trafficking, and abuse? The approach we have pursued in the past many years is paying off. No doubt, and statistics speak loud and clear, the world supply of illicit drugs is declining. The global area under opium cultivation, mostly in Afghanistan of course, has dropped by almost a quarter in the past 2 years, and it looks set to a steep fall this year. Coca cultivation is down by almost a third in the past 9 years, and cocaine production has fallen by a fifth, almost 20% in the past 3 years. Heroin and cocaine markets are stable in the developed world. In some countries, they are actually shrinking, the markets. Cocaine consumption, for example, has fallen significantly in the United States in the past few years. In short, in mature markets, in affluent countries, namely, drug control has worked and is working. Stability of the drug situation in the rich countries, North America, Europe, let us say Japan, Australia. Stability in this area should not lead us to believe that drugs are no longer a problem. And therefore drugs should be treated, well, if not with benign neglect, certainly not with the priority attributed to it in the 90s, when member states decided at the United Nations to launch the decade of UN gas. Drugs still kill about 250,000 people worldwide every year. They, of course, destroy families and communities alike and feed an illicit economy of tens of billions of dollars. We must recognize and act against this dramatic consequence of drugs and deal with these dramatic consequences with unmitigated determination. Otherwise, those who claim that drugs are an intractable problem, they are the source of organized power worldwide, well, they will keep championing the views that controls are unworking and therefore drugs should be made legal. Both sides of the argument, now raging in the rich countries, don't seem to care about the consequences drugs are having on the rest of the world. And that is my preoccupation. For over a century, market forces have shaped the asymmetric dimension of the drug economy. The world's biggest consumer of the poison, namely rich countries, have imposed a major tax upon the poor countries where drug supply and trafficking take place. From the Andes to Southeast Asia, governments have been forced to spend scarce resources to fund eradication and crop substitution programs to reduce illicit drugs, or illicit crops of drugs. Similarly, from Mesoamerica, Central America, Mexico, the Caribbean, from Mesoamerica to West Africa, very poor countries have been fighting an uneven battle against drug traffickers that we have seen inebriated by the scent of money and power. This has been the situation so far, but news is not good. There are now new, potentially devastating consequences in the third world caused by drugs. Drugs availability, and I will explain how this happens in the third world. Drugs availability and therefore drug use in the third world is starting to unleash a public health disaster that eventually will cause, I'm afraid, large-scale drug dependence in the third world. Another drama in poor lands already ravaged by so many tragedies, and of course I have in mind Africa first of all. Such a bleak future, take it back, such a bleak future is already manifested in the present. If you want a glimpse of it, come with me to the slums of Nairobi, Mombasa, where mobs of heroin addicts roam the street, literally, with syringes in their hands. Or on the alleys of Bissau and Conakry, West Africa, to see the underage foot soldiers of foreign criminal groups smoking drugs very near. Smoking drugs they have earned by providing local logistics to transnational shipments. Or visit the parts of the Middle East and Southeast Asia where the abuse of synthetic drugs, now produced domestically, this is more serious, is exploding. So what do we propose at UNODC facing this drama, especially in poor countries, much less in rich countries? We champion placing drug policy at the intersection of health, security, development, and justice. And let me explain. To begin, of course, the right to health. Two dimensions, and this is it. The first dimension, we are advocating universal access to drug therapy. At the United Nations, we are working, of course, with NGOs worldwide, but institutionally, with the World Health Organization, to advocate universal access to drug treatment. This is not happening. We work with UNAIDS to prevent an HIV epidemic among injecting drug addicts. And I appreciate the support that is coming from the community level for these initiatives. Many organizations working with us are right here, attending this forum. But the second dimension of the health problem of drugs, and this is new, and you may be surprised. We are now advocating universal access to therapy by means of drugs. Let me get it right, because I'm the Executive Director of the UN Office Against Drugs. Universal access to therapy by means of drugs. Although it may seem strange today at this World Forum Against Drugs to talk about this, I would like to insist that we should not only stop the harm caused by drugs, we should unleash the capacity of drugs to do good. What do I mean with this? And get it right. Recall the preamble of the Single Convention, 1961. It's 50 years old. The preamble says, medical use of narcotic drugs is indispensable for the relief of pain, and adequate provision must be made to ensure their availability. Although there is an oversupply of opium in the world, mostly from Afghanistan, many people who suffer major illnesses have no access to palliative care. Why? Why should a Nigerian consumed by AIDS, or why should a Mexican cancer patient be denied medication which is offered daily to their Swedish, American, Japanese counterparts? Ladies and gentlemen, help us overcome cultural, professional, administrative, and socio-economic factors that conspire to deny people the opium-based relief. Let's call it what it is, morphine, the opium-based relief they need. That was my first point, help. Now, let me talk about the right to development. In addition to the right to health, we want to make sure that we reinforce the movement of the pendulum, swinging back toward also other dimensions in the common policy against drugs, namely development. As illustrated in various recent UNODC reports, drug production and drug trafficking are both causes and consequences of poverty. It could be economic poverty, it could be cultural poverty, it could be individual psychological poverty. Indeed, looking at the global picture of countries, 22 of the 34 countries least likely to achieve the Millennium Development Goals are in the midst or are emerging from conflicts located in regions that are magnets for drug cultivation and trafficking. More development means less crime and above all less conflict, and I would say less drug cultivation. This is why UNODC is working with governments, regional organizations, and development banks to promote a drug policy as a way to foster development, and vice versa, development to reinforce drug control. And we do this in the Balkans, in Central and West Asia, in Mesoamerica, and West and East Africa. Number 3, right to security. The drug control stakes are high and getting higher. Drug trafficking has become the main source of revenue to organized crime, as well as to insurgents, even terrorists. In other words, drug-related illegality has become a threat to nations in so many theaters around the world. Recent developments in West Africa, already mentioned, but also the Sahel, in certain parts of Central America, show the very real dangers of narco-trafficking to security. Even the stability of sovereign state is threatened. So grave is the danger that the issue is now periodically on the agenda of the Security Council. Unless we deal effectively with the threat posed by organized crime, our societies will be held hostage, and drug control will be jeopardized by renewed calls to dump the UN Convention Against Drugs that critics say are the cause of the crime and the instability I refer to. This would undo the progress that has been made in drug control over the past decade and unleash the public health disaster. Finally, let me refer to the question of human rights, and this is last but not least. Therefore, in addition to the right to health, the right to development, the right to security, let me add human rights. We must move human rights in the mainstream of drug control. Around the world, millions of people, including children, caught taking drugs are sent to jails, not to treatment. In some countries, what is supposed to be drug treatment amounts to cruel, inhuman, degrading punishment, the equivalent of torture, let me say. In several member states, people are executed for drug-related offenses. In others, drug traffickers are gunned down by extrajudicial ritual. As human beings, we have a shared responsibility to ensure that this comes to an end. Just because people take drugs or are behind bars, this does not abolish their right to be a person protected by the law, domestic and international. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, my wish is to see drug policy stay the course we have promoted UNODC over the past many years. Focus on the 4 basic rights, and I repeat, to ensure that we are agreeing: health, development, security, and human rights. I am sure you will agree, and I thank you all for what you have done in the past, recent past, 18 months old is the history of this institution, and for the help in the years to come. Let us remain united against drug, and we shall overcome. And thank you for your attention.